Okay, hello everyone, and thanks for coming today. As you've heard, I will talk about subjective cognitive decline, or as we'll call it, SCD, and how it relates to everyday functioning and to objective cognition. How do I? Okay. Good. So an overview of today's talk, we'll talk about changes in activity participation in people with subjective cognitive decline. We'll talk about the interactions with objective cognition and everyday functioning. Then I'll describe what occupational performance issues people with SED describe, what is actually happening in their everyday life, and then talk a little bit about an approach to deal with these issues and improve their performance in things that concern them. So before we dive into the topic, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page in regards to what is the population that we're talking about. So if you ask an older adult, someone over the age of 60 or 65, do you think you have memory problems? Somewhere between 22 to 80 will say yes. Now it kind of depends on what you ask, because there's a difference between asking, do you have memory problems? Are there changes in your memory? And then if you ask, are you concerned about your memory? That takes the percentage down, because some people may say, yeah, not as good as it was, but good for my age, I'm fine with it. So the question makes a difference, and that's why we see a large variety in the percentages here. But in any case, when people describe having memory problems, and then they're tested for objective memory impairments using regular neuropsychological batteries that we have. And then there are one of two ways that it could go. One option is that they have objective memory problems, and then they may be defined as having MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or maybe even dementia, depending on how bad the impairment is and how much of an implication it has on their everyday life. But then there's another category. It's not a medical diagnosis, but it's getting more and more there's a growing literature on this phenomena, which is subjective cognitive decline. So these are people who say, my memory is not as good as it was. I'm feeling that it's getting worse. They go to the doctor, they complain about having memory problems. The doctor tests them or sends them to a neuropsych testing, and everything is fine. And they're being told, yeah, don't worry about it. Everything's good. Go home. And this is the focus of this talk today, this specific population. Oh, sorry. I'm not going to go into all these details, but mild cognitive impairment, which is now called mild neurocognitive disorder in the current DSM, reflects having cognitive impairment in more than one domain. The person would have to report having cognitive problems, or a family member would report. Preferably something that is found in objective neuropsych measurements. But more importantly, MCI is said to not have a very significant, this is MCI, not SCD, okay? MCI does not interfere with independence. However, people with MCI, and this is well studied, do have problems in their everyday life. They need to use more compensation strategies. They make greater efforts to function in things that they didn't have to make much of an effort in the past. And they have more difficulties in complex everyday life functioning, money management, hosting 30 people. So they get it. They're fine in their everyday life. They can cook dinner for themselves. They can get overwhelmed by planning a trip. Okay, so this is MCI. Not so much is known about everyday functioning in people with subjective cognitive decline. The definition for SCD is self or informed reported cognitive disturbances occurring in the absence of objective signs. Okay, so they're scoring within norms of neuropsych battery. The reason this is important is that these people are at risk for cognitive decline. So someone who reports having subjective cognitive decline is more at risk for developing MCI and dementia than a person in the same age saying, no, I don't have any memory problems. Okay, so the fact that they have memory, they are experiencing subjective cognitive decline does put them at a higher risk for future. And this within, for example, 7 years in this study. So they are at a higher risk for cognitive decline, objective cognitive decline. Now, not a lot is known about SED and everyday functioning. Some studies that have been done focused on basic activities of daily living and instrumental activities of daily living. Are these terms that I need to explain, or are people? Yes? Okay. So I'm an occupational therapist by background. So these are terms that we often use. Activities of or basic activities of daily living, or ADL, are the basic activities someone needs to perform on himself in order to function basically in daily life. Those include things like bathing, toileting, eating, not preparing the meal, but just eating, okay, the very basic functions of everyday life. And instrumental activities of daily living are those that are more complex. And that includes things like cooking, mobility in the community, getting around from place to place, taking medications. Okay, so more they are more cognitively demanding. So people with SED are at risk for developing ADL and IADL difficulties over a 1-year period. Also, the conversion rate from SED to dementia are higher in people who have SED and some impairments in IADL, in those higher functioning performance. So that's why it's important to identify. And people, so again, they come to the doctor, they complain about memory problems. We test them, they're okay. Not many healthcare providers would go to the next step and ask them, how's your everyday functioning? Has anything changed there? And this is important to follow up on. And it's especially important, I'm kind of going forward to the end of the talk, because this is modifiable. We can't, as an occupational therapist, or generally speaking, the cognitive changes cannot necessarily be reversed, or it's very controversial whether or not they can be reversed. But the everyday life implications can definitely be reversed, and that's why it's important to identify these changes. And another piece of this introduction, before I go into the actual findings or the actual study, is to define the term participation. Participation, again, this is a very OT term, occupational therapy, and is defined as involvement in life situations. It's a broader term than just doing activities. It's not about how often do you cook, how often do you clean your house. It's more about, are you involved in activities that you enjoy, that are meaningful to you, that are important to you. And that's why it's a vital part of human condition and experience. It leads to life satisfaction, a sense of competence, and is essential for psychological, emotional, and skill development. Okay? So that's why those questionnaires asking, how often do you do your shopping? Are you doing your shopping okay? Yes. Are you doing your financial management? Yes. They do not reflect the broader term of participation, which is what we try to look at and what I will focus on. Okay, so right. For the first part of looking at everyday functioning in SED, these are the 4 questions that we'll talk about. So the first step will be to ask, do older adults with subjective cognitive decline report changes in activity participation? Are they functioning like they did in the past or not? And the second question that we'll try to answer is, do individuals with high, moderate, and low cognitive functioning, so meaning people who report having memory problems, but we'll divide them into 3 groups according to their objective cognitive level, does their functioning differ? And then we'll go on to questions 3 and 4 later. So I'm not going to go through them right now. And before we answer the question, sorry, this is a long introduction. I want to tell you about how we measure participation in this study. There's more than one way to measure participation. In this specific study, we used a measure called the activity card sort. So we're not just asking the person, are you shopping? Are you cleaning? We are asking the person, and this is a set of pictures. We use a set of pictures that show adults and older adults doing all kinds of activities. And we ask the person about each activity. Is this an activity that you did in the past? Yes or no? And currently, are you doing it? So are you doing it as much as you did in the past? Are you doing it less or not doing it at all? Okay. And what we get is an understanding of the person's current participation in comparison to what they themselves, the way they participated in the past. Okay, so that reflects a real change in the person's participation. And the final scores are just percentages. So if we have, there are 80 activities divided into 4 different categories. But if one category has 10 activities and the person performed 10 in the past and is now performing 8 of them at the same level, that would be rated as 80%. Okay? And what we end up with is a total score of participation and 4 separate scores for IADL. So this doesn't measure basic activities of daily living, but the IADL, leisure, and there are 2 types of leisure. There's leisure with low physical demands, watching television, arts and crafts, things that mostly are done at home, not all. And then leisure with high physical demands, things that are sports related, hiking, things like that. And then social activities, social interaction, family, friends, those kinds of things. And what we did is so this is a combination of actually of 2 studies. We have 91 people, Israeli older adults tested in Israel, and then another 23, I think, from a separate study that was performed here. And as part of my PhD, it's part of my postdoc, I combined data from collected at Baycrest with data from my PhD, and this is what came out. So we took these 115 community dwelling older adults who report having memory problems. So we asked them and they said, yeah, I have some memory problems. And we tested them using the MoCA. The MoCA is a very well used, very often used, but a very rough measure of general cognitive status. It's not a very thorough neuropsych battery. This is the data that we had available. It's a secondary data analysis. So using the MoCA, it's not fair to use only the MoCA to define a medical diagnosis, but there are studies that show a relationship between certain scores and mild cognitive impairment or dementia, and we use those cutoff scores, and we divided our sample into 3 groups. The first group, we call them having high cognitive functioning. They are the equivalent of SCD. So they score over 26, which is considered, or 26 and above, which is considered normal cognition. And then we have this group of people with moderate cognitive functioning, could be the equivalent of a mild cognitive impairment. And then we only had 15 people who scored pretty low and could be classified as having dementia. And okay, this looks at what we did. We compared, so just in terms of age, you can see that the higher functioning people are younger, okay, and they're significantly younger, okay. So, and that's not surprising because as people age, there's more cognitive. You can find more cognitive deficits. There is no difference in gender or in something here is a little wrong with the slide, but or level of education. So these are pretty well educated group of people. And before we go into the comparison between the groups, I want you to look at the dark blue bars. The dark blue bars reflect what people with high cognitive functioning, people with SCD, report about their everyday functioning. And what we can see is, I didn't mention, we asked them to compare their functioning to either one study asked about 5 years ago and the other about 10 years ago. So we're not asking them to compare to themselves at the age of 25. Okay, so these are people around 75, and we're asking them to compare their functioning to the way they functioned 10 years before. And what we can see is that in leisure that is related to high physical demands, there's the most significant withdrawal from participation to a level of 62%. Okay, and then social look at social participation, social activities, they've withdrew from approximately 1/4 of their previous functioning. And in general, they're functioning at about 80% of what they used to function 5 to 10 years before.
Right. So if you asked them what percentage you're doing, or what was
No. So we gave them all these 80 pictures of activities, and we asked them, did you do this in the past? And if the person said yes, and then we asked, are you doing it now? Yes, but not as much. And that's how we calculated the percentages.
So 78.6 would be that they're doing almost all of what they've been doing.
Yes, exactly. So it could be that they totally given up some of the activities. It could be that they're doing those activities less. Yeah, but okay, so they are functioning less than they did. What is important to notice, however, is that this group is still functioning better than the other two groups. Okay, so if I look at the total, so what this reflects is, so we did a MANOVA, but the point, what this reflects is that this bar is the comparison between these two groups, and if it has this asterisk, it means the difference was statistically significant. Okay, so there is a statistically significant difference between the group with SED and both the other groups in terms of the total participation in activities. The picture gets more interesting when we look at different subscores. Okay, so when we look at the leisure with high physical demands, we see that the high functioning group and the moderate, so the SED and mild and MCI, are functioning. There's a difference between them. Sorry. Yeah, there's a difference between the high functioning and MCI and the high functioning and dementia, yet people with MCI and dementia are functioning similarly in leisure activities that have high physical demands. Now, it could be that these people with more cognitive impairments are also more physically limited. But also, when we looked at it more, the leisure activities with low physical demands are often things that people do at home and are more routine. And those activities like hiking, it's not only about the physical ability, it's also about planning. If you want to take a hike, you need to find someone to do it with, maybe. You need to find the right trail. You need to find a trail that is a good fit for your physical abilities. That requires cognitive abilities that maybe people with both mild cognitive impairment and dementia can't do, or can do less than they used to. And they would need more environmental support, perhaps. Interestingly, in terms of social activities, we can see that a similar trend. Okay, so the group with SED is functioning better than the other two groups. Okay, in all three groups, the IADL area is more preserved than social and leisure activities. Okay, so this is 85 compared to 60 and 70. Well, it's true for the IDL and the leisure, but generally speaking, IDL is more preserved than social activities and this leisure group. And I can explain it in two ways. One is that some of these IADL activities are more routine, cooking, cleaning, some of them are not that complicated. And another thought is that these are things that people see as a must do. I must take my medications. I must clean the house. I must cook for myself or for my family members. So they kind of put all their efforts there. And then there's less energy and less cognitive reserve to use for leisure and social activities. Okay, so that's why, generally speaking, we see more deterioration in IADL, specifically in these groups. Okay. Oh, sorry, we see less withdrawal from IADL activities. Okay, now let's get to, this was actually, I believe, the second question. Oh, no, the third question. So is participation associated with objective and subjective cognition? And to answer this question, we use a scale of subjective cognition that is called the Multifactorial Memory Questionnaire. This is a self-report questionnaire. People are given paper with questions, and they have to rate their either frequency or agreement. And this includes 3 subscales. So one is the MMQ ability. So this would ask, how often do you make all kinds of mistakes? How often do you forget to pay bills? How often do you leave the house without something that you need? How often do you forget a word in a conversation? And that's what people rate. Then there's the satisfaction scale. That includes questions like, I feel that my memory is worse than other people my age. I'm very concerned about my memory. Sometimes I think I may have Alzheimer's, and a person has to rate their level of agreement with these sentences. And then strategy use. So again, list of strategies, and people say how often they use them. And these strategies may be things like using a checklist, using my calendar, but also things like making an acronym out of 3 words so I can remember them, or going through the alphabet to remember a word and things like that. Okay, so we ask people to report how they perceive their memory, and that's why it's very subjective. And what we see is, and I'm sorry, maybe a little, I don't know, overwhelming, but so what we see is we have the MoCA, which is the objective cognition, and we have the different MMQ scales, and up here we have the activity card sort scales. And this gives us the relationship, and again, the asterisk tells you if it's significant or not, the relationship between these 2 aspects. And what we see is, generally speaking, objective cognition is, oh, sorry, this is a mistake, associated with all subscales of the activity card sort. And the different, the MMQ ability, so how do I perceive the amount of mistakes, the frequency of mistakes that I make in daily life, is also associated with participation. And so is satisfaction, less so strategy use. Okay, so the frequency of strategy use is less, it is correlated with the total activity card sort scale, but not the different subscores. And the reason for that may be, or I don't know if you have any thoughts, but the reason for that may be that, first, that some of the strategies in that list don't really help in everyday life. So that people, if someone reported, I don't use the acronym method ever, so they get a low score in MCA, but those are not very helpful in everyday life anyway. So it may be the strategies that are included in that list that would not be correlated with everyday life. Yeah. No, that's right. It's not a straight, right. So we all use strategies, and this is something that, I mean, even teenagers are, when you have to manage some complexity in your everyday life, you use cognitive strategies for sure. And we would expect them to be correlated with everyday functioning. So if I'm more organized, then I don't forget meetings. If I take notes, I put things in my calendar, I get to places on time, I get my tasks done. So generally speaking, we expect strategies to reflect, to be correlated with everyday functioning. We do see that older adults tend to be less efficient in the strategy use. So they try to use strategies, but it doesn't work very well because their executive functions are impaired to some extent. And so that's one finding. And another finding is that they're less flexible. So they try out one strategy, and if it doesn't work, they are less flexible in trying out another one, an alternate. So in this case, we didn't find that relationship that would be maybe expected. Okay. And then the most important thing, or an important question that we wanted to answer is, does the doctor, I'm putting this in a simpler language, does the doctor have to ask about subjective cognition? Can they just do the test to understand if there are implications on everyday functioning? Maybe they could just do the objective cognitive test that we saw correlates with everyday functioning. And that's that. Is that enough? And what we see is that, and this is a regression model, and we see that the MoCA itself, the cognitive status on its own, explains about 22% of the variance in participation. So that's moderate. I mean, that's a good regression result. But then if we add the subjective cognition, it explains another 9%. So it complements that objective finding. The practical meaning of this is that it's important to ask people about their subjective cognition, because if a person has two people with the same objective cognitive status, one feeling that their memory is bad and the other feeling that their memory is well, that has a meaning to what I can expect from their everyday functioning. Okay, that could say something about the potential of their everyday functioning, and that's why it's important to ask about everything. And also it's important to ask about everyday functioning, and what we see here is that it's important to not only ask about ADL and IADL as is often done in geriatric clinics. It's important to ask, are there changes in your social activities? Are you going out less with friends? And, aging is a complex time in people's lives. So, maybe their best friend can't go out anymore. But these are things that are important to identify, because we know that they could be addressed and that they could play a role in people's future independence and deterioration. So we covered the first two pieces, okay? So we've acknowledged that there are changes in participation in people with SCD, and that there is a relationship between, kind of a complex relationship between objective, subjective cognition and activity participation. And the next part of the talk is going to focus about occupational performance issues that people with SCD identify, okay? So what does that mean? Okay, hold on, let me take a sec. So the information that I'm going to present now is taken from a very large intervention study that is ongoing. It hasn't done yet, where we ask people to identify occupational performance issues. We use what we call a standardized interview called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure. And basically what we do is we sit with the person, we say, I want you to tell me about any issues, concerns, problems that you may be having that are related to your everyday life. Tell me about any activity that you want to be doing more of, or you want to be doing better, or you want to start doing, and whether or not you've done it in the past. So any concern, anything related to everyday functioning. And well, this is an intervention study. So the idea is that this is a large randomized controlled study. We'll divide these people into two groups. Some of them will get one type of intervention, the others will get different kind of intervention, and we'll see what effect this has on their everyday life. We have initial data for that, but first I wanted to tell you about what we found, about what answers we got to that question. So what kind of problems are you having in your everyday life? We later asked them to rate the importance of this issue from 1 to 10, and to rate their performance and satisfaction, but these are not scores that we'll be looking at now, but this is how we use it as an outcome measure, because we ask this in the beginning of the intervention, at the end of the intervention, and then we can compare. So let's see what they told us. So the way we used the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. This is a classification that was put together by the World Health Organization. And the idea, this is a model that explains the consequences of health conditions, the broad consequences of health conditions. So a person may have any type of health condition, and we know that people could be diagnosed with the same thing, and their outcomes look very, very different. And this model reflects that complexity. So there is the level of body function and structure. So it could either be physical or cognitive. Okay, there are cognitive changes, but we wanted to look at changes in activity and participation. Now this classification gives very detailed information. I just brought, I don't know, maybe you want to take a peek, but the idea is that it has they go into detail, and they have categories and subcategories of different body functions and structures, activities, and participation. Okay, so we use their very elaborate classification to we did a qualitative content analysis. So we have two students looking at these OPIs, occupational performance issues, and saying, oh, I think this qualifies as a domestic activity. Oh no, and then they cannot agree, and then we'll discuss until we reach consensus. So we currently have about 110 community dwelling older adults. And this, I told you that they're participating in a large randomized control trial. However, the data that I'm now going to show you is initial data. So this is an ongoing study. The initial results are from 45 people, okay? And we got this long list of things that people are having trouble with. I want to be able to post a picture on Facebook. These are things that people tell us, okay? Remember why I entered the room. That we hear often, okay? Find a part-time job. But that we only had once so far. Helping my daughters in whatever. Computer use. Putting things on my shopping list. And then there's the other person saying they want to take their shopping list with them. Okay, this is something they're having issues with. They keep getting to the supermarket without their list. Another person told us they keep leaving their credit card in the machine at the supermarket. So all kinds of things that people. One person wanted to fully understand Apple products. I do too, but okay. Painting, go on vacation, remembering names and words, people often tell us, okay? And then, so we got this long list, and we tried to make sense of it. And what we found is, and again, these are very initial findings from from 284 OPIs. So these are almost 300 issues that these 45 people told us about. So 70 of them, these are not percentages, these are numbers, are related to community, social, and civic life. And I'll tell you a little bit about what each one of these things mean. But so the big chunks are related to social and community, social, civic life, general tasks and demands, learning and applying knowledge. I'll tell you a little bit about communication. Communication is an interesting one. I'll go into it in a sec. Okay, so what does this mean? 70 people, or not 70 people, 70 activities that were related to social, community, and civic life. These are things like wanting to get into a new hobby or do a hobby better, recreation, leisure, art, socialize, go out with friends, do some sports activity. So the ICF is what they defined these are numbers from their ICA, from the classification, and they put all of these under community, social, and civic. They give us the structure, okay? And this is an interesting one, political life and citizenship. So only 2 OPIs related to that, but this was one person who wanted to be more politically active and wanted to, have her effect on politics and what's going on in the world. So these are interesting things, and these are things that we don't capture in structured questionnaires that ask, do you go out? Do you go shopping? How often do you, whatever. Self-care, maintaining diet and fitness. A lot of people want to exercise, okay? They hear more and more how important it is. Exercise for their cognitive functioning. I don't know how many of you know that, but being involved in physical exercise is one of the most important things, or the most proven thing to be associated with cognitive functioning as we age. So anything that gets your heart pumping should be good for that. Maintaining health is often, so these 10 issues are often related to remembering to take medications on time, put my eye drops on time, things like that, but also things like, I want to understand more what my issues are, okay? Only had one person talk about dressing or very basic self-care. Doing housework, people. So often these things related to housework are a lot of people, or some people may relate even if they're not 60 or over. Doing housework, procrastination. I don't feel like doing my laundry. Yes, I admit I sometimes send my kids to find a clean shirt in them because I haven't folded the clothes in weeks. So okay, so doing housework, and people feel they want to get a better handle on that. This is also an interesting one. Carrying out daily routines. This is the category. What this actually reflects, this ICF category, is things that are related to what we call prospective memory. This is remembering to do things in the future. Go to my appointment on time. Not forget I set a meeting with a friend. Turn off the stove. Okay? So these are things that are, so a lot of these are about, managing my time, planning my time better, things like that. And then communication. Okay, so these 36 things that fall under communication are actually those, what is the name of this flower I wanted, or not finding the right word in a conversation, not being able to retrieve a name of someone, a name of a movie I read, a name of a book I read. Okay, these are, and the thing is, as an occupational therapist, we didn't really see this as an activity, right? But we asked people, what is significant issues that you're having in your everyday life? That was the question. And they said, oh, I can't remember words and names. And yeah, so I'm not going to limit them to activities by my definition, because this is what is bothering them. And this is what we should be looking at. And then one thing that we hear very often is people wanting to acquire skills related to technology use. It could be very broad. I want to be able to find things on, use my iPhone better, but sometimes it's very specific. I want to be able to post a picture on Facebook. Okay, so this person tells us, I have a Facebook page. I can read my grandkids' stuff. I can do a, like or whatever, but I don't know how to post a picture. And they can't problem solve that on their own. And so it's an issue. Email related issues and things like that. And then major life areas reflect things mainly related to financial management. So either paying bills on time or just, getting a better handle on my finances. Often people find themselves having to do their finances after the spouse who has done it in the past is no longer with them, and they feel that they're not on top of things, or just because of cognitive changes, they feel they're not as doing it as well as they used to. So generally speaking, what are the performance issues that they're having? A lot are tip of the tongue issues, tip of the tongue problems. People want to be doing more hobby-related things. Oh, one thing that I didn't mention, because it wasn't, is wanting to volunteer. So we don't hear that very often, but we do hear that people wanted to pursue volunteer options. Leisure, socialize, technology, manage their daily routine. People mention things like procrastination that are typical to adults as well, but they seem to not be able to solve those problems for themselves. And that brings us to the final part of this talk, and that what can we do about it? What can we do about these occupational issues? And what I want to tell you a little bit about a training that as I said, we're currently running a big randomized controlled study that is called, the name changed back and forth a few times, but the name we're going with now is Aspire, Adult Strategies Put into Real World Environments. The acronym is great. The sentence is a bit long, but I think it represents our training very well. So this is an individualized metacognitive group intervention. It could be done one-on-one, but we think the group has a very strong power in terms of understanding that you are not alone in this. And what we mean by metacognitive is that people learn to understand the cognitive processes that are behind their everyday function and learn to explicitly use a global cognitive strategy that I'll talk about in a minute to support their everyday functioning. And it's individualized, meaning every person in the group works on whatever issue they are concerned with, and they each find whatever solution works best for them. So we could have two people in a group with a very similar issue, but they will have totally different ways of coping with it. And I'll go into detail a little bit here. So the objectives are to improve performance in specific everyday activities that are trained in the program, and to enable ongoing independent management of challenges in everyday functioning. It's a bit long. By providing knowledge and support for generalization and transfer. What this means is, if someone is having a problem and I tell them, oh, you know what could help you? This, this, and that. And then they go do this, this, and that, and their problem is solved. And so that helped them solve a specific everyday problem. But what happens when they have another problem? How will they solve that? So they can either come back to me and ask, but this is a 10-week training, so I won't be there forever. So the idea is to provide them with a strategy that can help them cope with new problems. So what we do is, when someone says they identify issues, we use a strategy to help them find and analyze the problem and find a way to solve it in a way that they could then later use for other problems. And this is what this is about. So this is about transfer of knowledge, and I'm talking about a lot of things that you don't yet understand. So I'll just jump into this, and I may go back to the other essential elements if we have time. This is the cognitive strategy that we use. This is called the global cognitive strategy. This is not a memory strategy. It's more of an executive functioning problems. Executive functions are higher level cognitive abilities that people use to plan, monitor, regulate. Right? These are higher level cognitive thinking. And what we do is people identify an issue. Okay, the issue could be, I'm not exercising enough. Then we turn it into a goal, and we turn it into a SMART goal. So what's your goal? And then someone can say, my goal is to jog 5 kilometers 3 times a week. Someone can say, my goal is to walk 20 minutes 4 times a week. So the goal could be very different for different people. And then we help them come up with a plan. And we use one of the very important, I'm going back to the slide for a minute, essential element is what we call guided discovery. We never tell, we ask. Okay? So we ask them, what could work for you? And you each can try to, think of an occupational issue that you may be having. So what do you think, what has helped you in the past when you wanted to exercise? Did you exercise in the past? Is there anything else that you're doing on a regular basis? Can you use maybe that method and apply it to exercising? So the problem is and then we do what we call dynamic performance analysis. So you want to exercise, but what's happening? Why aren't you exercising? So I want to exercise, but it's cold outside, and the building in front of me doesn't plow the snow, so I can't walk there. Oh, okay. So so that's a problem. What can you do? So one option. So people come up with, I'm going to walk in the mall. Or for the winter time, I'll go to the gym. Or, they have different solutions to how they're going to cope with this need to exercise. So we identify what limits them, and we come up with a plan that could work based on the performance analysis that we do. And then, and important to say that sometimes people talk about plans that, as a facilitator, I'm like, oh, I don't know if this could actually work, but I have to then work very hard on myself to say, you know what? Let them try it out. It may work for them. Because people know themselves, and people know, and these are not people with dementia, right? We're taking people with SED, may have mild MCI. They know what's good for them. They're adults. So they come up with a plan, and sometimes they really surprise me. So, and surprise us. We have an occupational therapist who's now facilitating most of these groups. So then people go out and plans, and then they come back and they report what happened. So the plan was to walk in the mall 3 times a week, but then it didn't work out. Why? Well, it didn't work out because I thought I would do it on Wednesday, but then laundry took too much time, and I didn't have time. Or I was counting on getting a ride with a friend, but she was sick and I couldn't go there. Okay, so let's think of solutions. Let's think, does this mean we need to change the plan? Does this mean, so often the plan is tweaked and changed a few times until we finally get to the cycle where when we're checking, we can say, oh, great, we're at goal attainment. And this is the process that we do. And the idea is, it's very explicit. People look at, see this scheme, they have this in mind. So next time they have a problem, they can say, okay, so I have a problem. Now let me think of a goal, let me think of a plan, then I'll monitor my plan. So they're not stuck with the issue. And what we also do is through those plans, sometimes within the plan are integrated specific strategies, like make a list, use a reminder. These are more like maybe more specific memory strategies, or it could be any, ask for help. Asking for help is a great strategy. And what happens is as people bring this up, we have this kind of tool, we call it the strategy toolbox. We make a list of those. And then the next time someone is making a plan, we guide them to refer to this list. So you're trying to find a solution. We've solved the jogging issue. Now we were trying to find a solution to finding out how to post a picture on Facebook. Is there anything on the list of strategies that could help you? So if asking for help worked the first time, maybe asking for help could work for this. Maybe making a list could work for this. Maybe I could write it down. Okay, so that's how we, yeah.
So is part of the bringing it back to the group? Accountability.
Sorry, yes.
Idea, right?
Yeah, so there are two things that the group does. First, the group is a source of ideas. So if you're stuck, the group can help you. Second is what we find is that there's something about the social interaction and the social and the understanding that I'm not alone in the problem that is significant. But the point of accountability is a very, very important point. And this is something to think about because our participants sometimes say at the end of this training session, when we ask them, so what helped you in attaining your goals? They said, well, the fact that I had to report to this group. So that is a good point to think about. And I keep thinking maybe next step of this training would be to kind of create a peer support group that could do this process. So maybe a trainer is only needed in the beginning, but once the group knows how to do this process on their own, they could be meeting without it, because a facilitator costs money. That's, an occupational therapist or a social worker or whoever leading this group costs money. But if we can provide the supports for people to run this on their own, and all they need is a room, that is cheaper. So that's a great point, and maybe next step in the research. Yeah. Okay, so we use a goal tracking sheet for people to write down their goals. We find that it's very effective when people write it down. I think it's effective in two levels. One is you can reference back to it if you don't remember what we talked about. You can always look at it and then remember your plan. But also sometimes, you know how something seems very clear in your mind and then you write it down and it's like, oh, wait. It's that extra processing that could sometimes help us identify that, this plan is not completely resolved. So it's helpful in that way. And I want to tell you about a specific issue that one of our participants had, and how it evolved. Okay, so an example of using goal plan do check. The OPI, the occupational performance issue, was she wanted to do more arts activities or art activities. She wasn't very specific at that point. When we asked her, okay, so let's talk about SMART goals. SMART being specific, measurable, attainable, real world, time specific, I think. Yeah, so the T is the time. So she said, yeah, I want to do 1 hour a day of music and art. Okay, so what is your plan for this? She said she wants to do 30 minutes of ukulele practice per day and organize old paints and canvases so I can go back to painting. So she said, I want to go back to painting, but first step is, and often our plans are, okay, so what are you going to do this week? Because, she understood that she needs to organize her canvases and paints so she can go back to painting. And now let's see what happened. Oh, okay. So there was, there was an animation here. But it's lost on this presentation, sorry. So the idea was this. So these were supposed to appear step by step. If I go, yeah, okay, that's not gonna happen. So as I said, this was her original plan, and then she came back to us and said, how did it work? She said, yeah, worked great. I practiced the ukulele, and I started organizing my canvases, and I'm going to continue with this plan for the following week. And we said, great. And then she came back the following week, and she said, yeah, I'm practicing my ukulele. She ended up, she signed up to a ukulele class. So that created another accountability. And we actually, accountability is often integrated into our strategies toolbox. And then people sometimes create accountability, like telling a friend to ask them, did you clean out your fridge? Okay. So anyway, so then she came back and she said, you know what, I'm going to put aside my paint organization for a while because I got this new woodwork project someone asked me to help out on. I'm really excited about it. So that's going to be my art. So 30 minutes of ukulele and 30 minutes of art. Then she did the artwork and it worked for a while, and then that was over, and then spring came, and now she said gardening is my art. And as you see, the ukulele for a while was a great plan for her, worked very well. And she gardened, and then she came back and she said, I'm going to do gardening. And we asked, how was it? And she said, well, it worked and it didn't, because I gardened, but the problem is I get carried away, and it just takes up too much time, and I don't have time for other things that I need to do. And then we said, okay, so what do you want to do about it? And she said, you know what, I'll schedule my gardening in the calendar. So I'll write, I will garden on Friday from 12 to 12:30, and on Saturday from 1 to 1:30. Okay, so that sounded like a plan. And she went, and then the week after she came back, she said, no, that totally didn't work. It stressed me out. It was annoying. I didn't want to schedule. I don't know. And what if a friend calls when I schedule to garden? So what do I do? Total failure. Okay. And it's an important process for them to understand that sometimes a plan doesn't work and we have to change it. But it doesn't mean I can't get to that goal. It's a process. So then she said, what I'll make a list of all the tasks that I have to get done, including gardening, and then I'll check things off the list. So it doesn't get higher priority than other things. I don't spend more time doing it and while not doing other things. And that worked well for her. But then at that time, ukulele started becoming a problem. So after a while, it went well. She started having joint pains, and she couldn't play the ukulele, and she had to stop. And then that got to see, and this was where the training ended, is that she said, okay, so I can't do the ukulele. I'm gardening as long as it's spring. And what I want to do is so again, she understood, we analyzed, this is the metacognitive process. She understood that having a regular class forced her to practice daily. And now what she decided to do is sign up to a painting class at her community center. So she said, I keep wanting to paint, but I don't. So if I sign up to a class, I know that I have, to bring things with me once a week, I'll paint. So again, this started as the question, so what worked for you? So you can't physically, I don't have a solution to joint problems, but what worked for you? What can you learn from that experience of the ukulele? And she said, accountability works for me. So let's then use it for other activities. And just to show you, so as I said, we use the COPM. I'm sorry for the sizes of the numbers here, but we use the COPM, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, to ask people to rate their performance and their satisfaction with that performance for that specific activity. So before the training started, it was at a 1 for both of them. Okay, so doing arts activities, my performance is 1. It's a scale from 1 to 10, so there's no 0. And satisfaction. At the very end of the training, it was 10 and 9. Then a 3-month follow-up was 8 to 7. I don't know what happened there, okay? So at this point, the research assistants meet with them. We just get the number. I don't have the qualitative, and that's a very interesting story, but I don't know what happened here. But then at a 6-month follow-up, she was at 9. And this is very important. So we know that so the training is 10 weeks. We have another booster session 2 months after. So, but still 4 months after the booster session, which is a 6-month follow-up, she seems to be doing well in that issue anyway. So, clinically, an improvement of 2 or more points is clinically significant in this scale. Okay, so yeah, for sure. So even if she improved to a 3, theoretically, it's good, but she improved. I chose this story because it's a great one. Others don't work as well, but a lot of them do. Okay, and that's as important. Because I don't have time, I'm not going to go into this, but I do want to present. So this is a pilot study of this approach with people with SED. So this was a study that was done in my lab before I joined the lab. But they had 10 people in the experimental group and 9 in the control. And first I want you to see that people improved 70% of the trained goals. So 70% of the goals that were targeted improved post-training. But what is also nice to see is they improved 50% of things that were not trained. So what we do is people people identify 5 issues. Then we randomize them. 2 get randomized to the untrained, and we do not talk about them. And we're very explicit in not discussing them in the group. And then the other 3 are trained. So we do the whole goal, plan, do, check process. And that gives us that controlled condition. So people were able to independently do something to improve their functioning in 50% of the issues without any direct training on that specific issue. And what's also nice to see is that at follow-up, this was a 3-month follow-up, people will still, their trained goals were relative, very similar and still improved in those goals. This is our experimental group. The control group, well, these are not applicable because none of the goals were trained or none of the issues were trained. But there was some spontaneous improvement in about 30%, 20% in performance. But it was, so when we look statistically, the improvement in the experimental group is statistically significantly more, sorry, my words are, so they improved significantly more than the control group, okay? So it works, generally speaking. So, bottom line, older adults with subjective cognitive decline do report some withdrawal from their own participation in the past. They are able to identify occupational performance issues. So even though they are independent and they're doing well, they do have things that they feel they want to improve in. And we see that a metacognitive training approach can help them improve their performance in these issues. So with that message, I want to thank you for listening today. This is my email. If anybody wants to contact me, they're more than welcome. Thank you. And if there are any questions, although we're at 1, but I'm more than happy to answer questions.
I was really interested in the spillover of that being so strong.
Yeah.
That's quite exciting. That's exactly what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it was exciting for us. Yeah. Okay, so the question is about attitude, and can you tell me a little bit what you mean? What? Okay. Mm-hmm. So, right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'll answer this in 2 levels. First, these are people who volunteer to participate in a study. We put up signs, we do talks all over the GTA. So in the talk, we say to qualify, you need to have some cognitive deficits and to identify some occupational issues. So maybe that gives us, the people who are interested in, although we don't say we're going to improve everyday functioning. We definitely don't say that because we have a control group and we're very vague about it. But the second piece of my answer is this. When we do the COPM, the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, people can list up to 20 or, a lot of activities that they're having issues with. And then we ask them to rate the importance of that issue to them. And then we choose the 5 that are most important to them. And you're very correct that sometimes it's the other. So people that are very content with their everyday functioning end up coming up with issues. Yeah, oh, you're asking me about issues. Okay, I'll give you 1. How important is it to you? It's a 4. And often they don't really improve because it's an effortful process. So if it's not really important to you, you're right, it's really hard to improve. Yeah. Hope that answered your question. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And we just have a little token
Oh, thank you. That's very nice.
today, and,
Thank you.
Very interesting and exciting. That's a huge difference you're making quickly. So.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Thank you to everyone who joined online.